The sky over Arizona was unusually clear on the afternoon of June 14, 1997. A wide, endless blue that stretched above the jagged red cliffs and cracked earth like a canvas. At exactly 2:38 p.m., an airship, the A-170 model Blimp known as the Zephyr, took off from a private hangar just outside Page. Painted in bold red and white with the iconic Coca-Cola logo across its side, the Blimp was scheduled to make a promotional loop above the city, part of a summer marketing campaign that included banners, flyovers, and aerial photography. At the helm was Harlan Vexler, 44, a quiet, methodical pilot with over 20 years of experience, flying advertising airships for sports events and brand tours. The flight plan was simple: a solo 2-hour circuit across Glen Canyon, looping back over the Colorado River before returning to the airfield. No passengers, no storm forecasts, just calm winds, a clear route, and a promotional glide meant to be seen by thousands on the ground. Dozens of onlookers spotted the Zephyr floating overhead near the southern rim of the city around 3:20 p.m. Kids pointed up from parking lots, families took photos from rooftops. Then, as the airship drifted toward a blind zone beyond Antelope Canyon, where radio and radar signals notoriously dipped, it vanished from all tracking. It never reappeared. When the Zephyr failed to check in by evening, the Coca-Cola operations team raised the alarm. Search and rescue was launched. For days, helicopters scanned ridges and riverbanks. Local pilots joined in. Nothing surfaced. No wreckage. No distress signal. No trace of the Blimp or Harlan. The desert had swallowed them whole. Rumors ran wild. Equipment failure, foul play, even sabotage. But nothing stuck. The official report labeled it an unsolved airborne disappearance. Harlan's family, unconvinced, continued to push for answers. Then, in 2009, 12 years later, a university geology team analyzing erosion data from satellite images flagged something odd in a canyon crevice 18 miles off the original flight path. A metallic curve, barely visible under a canopy of rock and sand. Before we dive into what they found, tell me, where in the world are you listening to this story from? What city? What country? Because this mystery, and the secret hidden in the desert, might just change the way you look at the sky. The satellite photo wasn't supposed to reveal anything unusual. Captured by a university drone on April 8, 2009, its purpose was to track soil erosion and water flow through a largely inaccessible section of Glen Canyon, a jagged, sun-scorched region long dismissed as barren. But in the upper right quadrant of the frame, a research assistant spotted something unnatural: a smooth, curved object partially buried beneath rock and dust. Its reflective surface caught the light just enough to stand out from the brown and beige surroundings. At first it was dismissed as debris, maybe the side panel of an old trailer or mining equipment. But when the photo was digitally enhanced, what emerged was unmistakable. A circular structure, at least 10 meters long, with rivets along the edge and what looked like faded red paint. One graduate student muttered, "That looks like a blimp skin." The university forwarded the image to the local sheriff's office. Within days, a coordinated team of geologists, deputies, and federal agents was flown into the canyon via helicopter. Reaching the site required rappelling down a narrow vertical rock face, surrounded by steep shadows and dry heat. There, wedged into a ravine, hidden from above by overhanging cliffs, lay the crumpled remains of a blimp gondola. Its windows shattered, fabric shredded, and control panels scorched. The logo, though weather-worn, was still visible. Coca-Cola, faded but unmistakable. It was the Zephyr. But what truly disturbed investigators wasn't the wreckage. It was how intact it was. The damage didn't suggest a high-velocity crash. No sign of explosion. No burn pattern consistent with an onboard fire. Even the flight logbook, though water-damaged, was still strapped to the dashboard. Most unsettling of all, no body. No human remains, Not even clothing. Just a neatly folded pilot's jacket resting in the co-pilot's seat, zipped shut, untouched by the elements. Inside one of the sleeves, a cassette tape, labeled in faded ink, for Eva. The canyon was silent, as if holding its breath. Whatever had happened to Harlan Vexler hadn't ended with a crash. It had only begun. The cassette, warped with time but still playable, was immediately flown to a forensic lab in Phoenix. The label, 4EVA, caught the attention of investigators. Eva Vexler was Harlan's daughter, 12 years old when he vanished. She hadn't seen or spoken to him that day. She remembered waving from their backyard as the Zephyr lifted off in the distance. That was the last time she saw her father. When the tape was played, the audio began with the sound of static and mechanical hums. Blimp machinery, likely recorded during flight. Then came Harlan's voice, calm, precise. The same tone he used in training manuals and flight logs. "Ava, if you're hearing this, something went wrong. I'm not sure how long I have, but I need you to know, this wasn't an accident." He pauses. You can hear the tremble in his breath. Then, "There's something I've been part of. Something I didn't understand until it was too late. I thought this job was just marketing, flying above cities, promoting soda, taking photos. But in the last 3 months, I've been followed, watched, and now they've told me to fly today, alone. No radio backup. I think this was meant to look like a malfunction." The investigators froze. Was he referring to Coca-Cola's marketing division? A subcontractor? Or something far stranger? "If they find the tape, they'll destroy it. I'm hiding it in my jacket. Ava, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what I agreed to. Tell your mother I love her. And if you see men in blue windbreakers, don't trust them." Static returned, and the tape cut off. When Ava heard the audio, now 24 and living in Chicago, she wept. Her father had left her a voice, one final moment of clarity, of truth, after 12 years of silence. But it also left her with more questions. Who were they? Why the mention of men in blue? And what was Harlan really involved in? The sheriff's department reopened the case as a potential criminal cover-up, not an aviation incident. FAA logs were re-examined. Harlan's last communications were pulled from analog archives. Most were ordinary, altitude reports, wind conditions. But the final message before he vanished struck a new chord. "Switching off radar trace. Just for a minute. Don't log it." Then silence. A deliberate disappearance? Or a man trapped in something far more complicated than airspace? The renewed investigation quickly focused on the Blimp's ground crew, specifically, the 2 technicians responsible for pre-flight checks at the Page airfield that day. One of them, Martin Hale, had since left Arizona, living quietly in Oregon under a different last name. When contacted, he refused to speak until he learned about the recovered tape. 2 days later, Martin arrived in Phoenix, visibly shaken. With trembling hands, he slid a weathered envelope across the interview table. Inside were photocopies of an internal memo from June 1997, never logged in official FAA records, and a Polaroid photograph of the Zephyr's control console with several non-standard components installed. "This wasn't the same Blimp we'd been maintaining for years," Martin said. "A few weeks before the final flight, we were ordered to install a guidance override system and a black capsule under the cockpit floor. No explanation. No one signed for it. According to Martin, a group of men claiming to be from a subcontractor for atmospheric research arrived with crates of specialized parts. They wore plain blue windbreakers, had no insignias, and paid in cash. They insisted on installing the module themselves and made the technicians sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, enforced with alarming pressure. When Harlan arrived that morning, he seemed distracted. Not afraid, but resigned. He didn't even joke like he used to, Martin recalled. Just nodded, got in, and lifted off. That was it. Martin had buried the evidence for over a decade, fearing retaliation. But the resurfacing of Harlan's message and the discovery of the intact blimp made him speak. The FBI took over the case within hours of his statement. Underneath the Zephyr's recovered floorboards, investigators found exactly what Martin described: a small black steel compartment welded shut. Inside was a sealed container wrapped in thermal mesh. Its markings were vague, but one word was unmistakable: StratoView. StratoView, it turned out, was a short-lived experimental branch of a private aerospace contractor known for conducting unauthorized high-atmosphere surveillance tests, often under the guise of commercial advertising blimps. Was Harlan unknowingly transporting a surveillance payload? Had he discovered it mid-flight? Or had the override system taken control of the ship altogether? Whatever the answer, it no longer seemed like a missing persons case. It was a covert operation, one that had gone very, very wrong. As federal agents dug deeper into StratoView's operations, a chilling connection emerged, one that hadn't been mentioned in over a decade. In 1996, exactly 13 months before Harlan vanished, another advertising blimp, a Goodyear model operating in Nevada, had similarly deviated from its course before losing contact over a remote desert region. That disappearance had been dismissed at the time as pilot error during a storm. The blimp was never found, and the pilot, Sharon Duquesne, was declared dead in absentia. But now, with the discovery of StratoView's presence inside the Zephyr, that earlier case no longer looked like an isolated incident. Archived footage showed the Goodyear blimp had been recently outfitted with experimental sensor arrays. A leaked invoice revealed the supplier, StratoView Industries. What if both blimps had been used for the same covert project? One disguised as a Coca-Cola promotion, the other as a sports advertisement. The similarities were too precise to ignore. Solo pilot, remote route, signal blackout, no distress call. In light of this, the FBI launched a multi-state task force. Deep scans were ordered in the Nevada desert using new LiDAR imaging. 2 weeks later, on the edge of a dried-out lakebed, they found what remained of Sharon Duquesne's blimp, crumpled, mostly buried, but still marked with the Goodyear insignia. Inside the wreckage, agents uncovered an identical black capsule beneath the control panel. And again, no human remains. However, this capsule had been breached. The mesh was torn, its contents missing. A nearby ranger station had reported strange readings on their atmospheric sensors that same month in 1996. Pressure fluctuations, irregular electromagnetic spikes. But the data was never followed up. One technician, now retired, came forward with a note he'd scribbled at the time. 4 words, written in red pen on the back of a utility invoice. "They're testing us here." Back in Arizona, Ava Vexler read the news in silence. She stared at the grainy photo of Sharon's ruined gondola and whispered, "Then he wasn't the first." But she also knew what that might mean. If this was a pattern, then someone, somewhere, still had the full data. Someone knew exactly what had happened to her father. And maybe, just maybe, he hadn't been lost. He'd been taken. The breakthrough came quietly, in the form of an anonymous email sent to the FBI's tip line. It included no introduction, just a subject line. "I built the capsule." Attached were schematics, internal memos, and a scanned security badge from StratoView Industries. The sender was eventually traced to a man named Dominic Rallis, now 63, living off-grid in the Sierra Nevada foothills. When agents visited, he met them at the door holding the original hard copy of the capsule's blueprint. "You're 12 years too late," he said. "But I'll talk." Over the next 6 hours, Dominic unraveled what he called a controlled atmosphere response system, the true function of the black capsules installed on both blimps. According to him, the devices weren't sensors or cameras. They were atmospheric modulation chambers designed to test the controlled release of airborne compounds over isolated zones. "You think they were advertising," he said. "But the blimps were flying labs. And the pilots? They weren't told. That was the whole point." Each capsule was programmed to release microscopic particulates at high altitude, supposedly for georeflection experiments. But Dominic suspected something darker. The payload wasn't always the same. There were tests we weren't allowed to document. Chemicals that didn't match anything in the manifest. Worse still, each capsule came with a manual override. A remote failsafe capable of controlling the airship's navigation. In other words, once launched, the pilot no longer had full command. Dominic explained that Harlan's blimp had been scheduled for its first full release run that June. It was supposed to be monitored remotely, with StratoView recording data via satellite. But then the signal went dark. StratoView denied everything, shut down operations within weeks, and dissolved quietly. Most employees signed NDAs. Dominic didn't. "I didn't come forward earlier because I thought he was dead," he admitted. "But if that tape was real, Harlan knew. Somehow he figured it out mid-flight, and if he did, he probably tried to stop it." The FBI expanded the investigation internationally. Eva was placed under protective surveillance after someone broke into her apartment, taking only her father's original flight log. This was no longer a question of a missing man. It was the unraveling of a secret program, one that had used pilots as test subjects, airships as platforms, and the sky as a canvas for silent experiments. And somewhere, buried in that silence, was the truth Harlan had died, or disappeared, trying to expose. Eva Wexler had grown up with absence, birthdays without answers, holidays marked by silence, and a father remembered only through grainy photos and fading stories. But after hearing his voice on that tape, something shifted. The mystery stopped being distant. It became hers. With law enforcement circling in bureaucracy and StratoView's traces disappearing into dead companies and shell contracts, Eva turned to the only thing still untouched: the satellite image that started it all. She requested the raw data from the university's geology department, claiming it for a thesis on erosion. It wasn't hard. She still had her student credentials from grad school. Alone in her apartment, she pored over high-resolution scans, one tile at a time. Dozens of frames stitched together the ravine where the Zephyr had been found. At first, it looked like dry terrain, rocks, brush, shadow. But in the upper left corner of the third quadrant, she saw something strange. A perfectly symmetrical indentation, about 2 meters wide, partially covered in wind-blown sand. Zooming in, she enhanced the color contrast and froze. The pattern was circular. The shape had no erosion channels. It was not natural. Eva cross-referenced the location with government geological surveys. That indentation didn't exist on any public record before 2009. It had appeared after the blimp vanished, or because of it. With help from a friend at a private satellite mapping startup, Eva ordered new images from the area, using modern LiDAR and infrared overlays. When the results came in, the shape was clearer than ever, a metallic dome buried just beneath the canyon surface. It wasn't part of the blimp. It was something else entirely. She alerted the FBI, but by the time agents returned to the ravine, the dome was gone. Only fresh tool marks remained in the dust, tracks that didn't match any government vehicle. Someone had gotten there first. Eva began receiving anonymous messages. "Stop digging," one read. Another simply said, "He died for nothing. Don't make it worse." But she didn't stop. Not anymore. Harlan had left her a message. Now she had a message of her own. T took nearly 6 months of emails, anonymous tips, and dead ends, but Eva eventually tracked down Raymond Delacroix, a retired federal aviation agent who had worked in Arizona in 1997 and had quietly vanished from public life after the Zephyr went missing. He now lived in a remote part of Utah, under an assumed name. When she showed up unannounced at his cabin, he didn't look surprised. He opened the door, stared at her for a long moment, then said, "You're Harlan's girl." Inside, surrounded by dusty folders and a table covered in shortwave radios, Raymond poured 2 cups of black coffee and sat across from her in silence. Then, he pulled a thick envelope from a drawer and slid it across the table. "Your father was supposed to make it home," he said. "He tried." Yoy. Inside were 3 documents: a partial transcript from an encrypted radio transmission, a classified FAA memo marked "Eyes Only," Stratoview, and a black and white photo taken from a high-altitude drone. It showed the Zephyr mid-flight, just before its disappearance, and beneath it, faint but visible, was the shadow of something else. A second object, flying silently beneath the blimp, matching its course. "It wasn't malfunction. It wasn't an accident," Raymond said. "Stratoview wasn't testing the blimp. It was testing the response to it. They needed to see what would happen if someone resisted the override system. Your father fought back." According to the transmission log, Harlan had cut power manually, forcing the Zephyr to drift. That act triggered an automatic failsafe. "They couldn't let it land," Raymond added. "If he grounded the capsule, the whole program risked exposure. So they intervened." Eva leaned forward. "Intervened how?" Raymond looked out the window. "They didn't crash it. They recovered it. Quietly. Took him with it. And made it look like a mystery. What they didn't count on was you." Eva sat in silence, the weight of it all finally sinking in. Her father hadn't died in the sky. He'd been erased. Raymond handed her one last item, a key, old and rusted with a tag. "Locker 47, Tucson Airfield." "I don't know what's in there," he said. "But it's the only thing they never got their hands on, and it belonged to Harlan." Eva clutched the key in her fist. The truth wasn't buried. It was waiting. Tucson Airfield had changed since 1997. New hangars, new security, fewer people who remembered the name Harlan Vexler. But the maintenance building near the edge of the tarmac was still there, and deep in its rusted hallway, the row of metal lockers stood exactly as Raymond described. Locker 47 sat at the far end, untouched. The key fit. The lock clicked. Inside was a dust-covered duffel bag, a reel-to-reel tape, and a leather-bound journal wrapped in plastic. Eva removed each item carefully, her hands trembling. A folded envelope rested at the bottom, addressed in ink, nearly faded away. "Eva, for when they lie." She sat on a bench and opened the journal. Page after page was filled with Harlan's tight, deliberate handwriting. Flight notes, coordinates, names, strange symbols. But the final pages shifted tone. He wasn't writing as a pilot anymore. He was writing as a father. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't come back. And if I didn't, they lied. They always do. You'll hear about accidents, malfunctions, weather. But the sky was clear that day. The winds were calm. And I knew what I was doing. The capsule wasn't just equipment. It was a test. They said it would track particles. But what I saw on that readout, it wasn't particles. It was people, signals, locations. I think we were intercepting more than weather. I think we were mapping something, or someone, and I wasn't supposed to know." The last entry was written in darker ink, almost carved into the page. "They took Sharon. They'll take me too. But if anyone can find the rest, it's you." Eva placed the journal in her bag and turned to the reel-to-reel tape. It was heavy, labeled AZ 1997 Final. A nearby technician offered to help play it. As the machine hummed to life, static filled the room. And then Harlan's voice again, older, heavier, more urgent. "To whoever finds this, you've uncovered the edge of something bigger than I understood. I was just the delivery man. They made us fly the lie. But the lie is falling apart. And if my daughter hears this, Ava, don't let them bury it again." His voice trembled, then cut to silence. Ava knew now. This wasn't just a cover-up, it was a confession. And what came next, what she chose to do with the truth, would decide whether her father's voice would finally be heard by the world. 3 months later, Eva stood in front of a packed auditorium in Flagstaff, holding her father's journal in one hand and a digital recording of his final tape in the other. The event, originally billed as a symposium on forgotten aerospace projects, had drawn journalists, aviation historians, and, most importantly, former Stratoview employees, many of whom sat stone-faced, their eyes avoiding hers. When she pressed play, the room fell silent. Harlan's voice filled the hall, calm, clear, defiant. As it ended, Ava stepped forward. "This is no longer about conspiracy. It's about truth. And if my father could risk everything to leave this behind, then none of us have the right to stay silent anymore." The story hit the national news within 48 hours. Old records surfaced. NDA loopholes were challenged. A whistleblower from the Department of Defense confirmed that the atmospheric payloads were part of a dual-use testing program. Environmental monitoring masked beneath civilian aviation. But some answers never came. The capsule's full contents were never recovered. Sharon Duquesne's name was quietly removed from federal missing persons lists, without explanation. And the Zephyr? It was shipped to a private facility, where access was indefinitely restricted. Eva returned home to Chicago, where she started a foundation in her father's name, the Wexler Sky Project, dedicated to exposing hidden aerospace operations and advocating for the families of pilots who vanished without trace. Each year on June 14th, she visits the same stretch of canyon where the satellite image first revealed the curve of red metal beneath the dust. She sits quietly, listening to the wind, the same wind that once carried her father into silence. No memorial marks the spot. No plaque or monument. Just a strip of sky, forever blue, where the truth once floated above us and was nearly forgotten. Until now.